Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to touch on the third part of our series on understanding analytics, and this is about taking the understanding that you have now and turning this into actionable information, things that you can actually do something with, make decisions with. So we want to talk about measuring return on investment, and this is going to be just a basic primer. I'm not going to get into specific formulas right here. But a basic primer on how you would create those formulas, and I really want to encourage you, don't be afraid to make a formula. Don't be afraid to put real world hard numbers into that formula and accept the results that kicks out and hold yourself to that, because just with the way the human mind works and all the cognitive biases that are out there, without something to anchor yourself and to kind of hold yourself to being honest with yourself, it is very easy to delude yourself or exaggerate to yourself how something is working, and these numbers help ground you. And doesn't mean that they're the end all in the discussion, but if you look at the numbers and the numbers don't add up with your assumptions, you should take a second look at the numbers, and you should take a second look at your assumptions and really try and understand if these two things don't match up, why is that? Use that to make yourself accountable. So we talked previously about analytic numbers. This is everything from impressions to visits, conversions, opportunities, sales, right? Those are all going to be important. You should know what your numbers are for each of those things, how many of each to get to the next step, understand how many impressions it took to get a visit, how many visits does it take to get a conversion, conversions to opportunities, opportunities to sales. You need to have numbers on that pipeline and be able to multiply and do the math all the way down, right? An important caveat I would add to this is understanding that for all of this we want to be talking about qualified traffic. So it can be very relevant when we're thinking about qualified traffic to take bounce rate into account and understand that a bounce is not qualified traffic, and to remove that from your equation when you're doing the math. And make sure whatever you're doing that you do it uniformly. If you're measuring your organic traffic and you take bounce rate out of organic traffic, don't just assume that all of your AdWords don't bounce. Your AdWords do bounce, and include that in your understanding as well, because that's, if you want to have this be as apples to apples as possible, keep your metrics fair regardless of which metric you're looking at. In addition, you want to have the numbers for your business together, and you should be clear in your mind about this. What's the value of a conversion? And try not to think in best cases here. A lot of times the easiest way to get something like the value of a conversion is to add up all of your business from the previous year and just divide that by the number of conversions, and say and in this case, I guess when I say conversions, I mean closed sales. There's, I think, a temptation to think like, oh, well, our ideal case is this, or our middle case is this. And again, this can get distorted in the numbers because we don't intuitively do a great job of averaging stuff out in our heads. So just take a minute to add everything up, divide by the total number of sales, get yourself an average cost of sale, and then don't be afraid to fact check yourself on that. Take a look at it again on a month-to-month basis. Add up all your sales for a month and divide by how many that was, and say, hey, is this consistent? Does this really give us what the average piece of business that we close is worth? You got to know that. Also, don't be afraid to take cost of doing business out of that. This is the difference between gross and net. Just because you brought business in doesn't mean it was 100% profit. So especially if you have a high cost of doing business, you want to think about that. And you want to think about how your overhead costs relate to these things versus the specific cost of delivering a good. If you've got a product that you're selling, you sell a physical good, that physical good is really important to just take that straight out of this. That's a cost you can never get around. If your costs are primarily overhead, all of a sudden you have to look at this and say, hey, look, my overhead's my overhead no matter what. Every new sale I bring in, helps to take that overhead cost, to cover that overhead cost, and it isn't really a cost of getting each of those new sales. So understand that, make sure you factor that into your equations, and understand then also, is there long-term value to the clients that I bring in? If you offer a service that is I'm trying to think of a great example here. I was going to say like a crisis service. You're only going to get repeat clients if your clients have another crisis. I don't know if divorce lawyers, for example, depend on repeat business, but the idea is you're not doing one of those a month with the same person, versus if maybe you sell a product that people need every month, a home good or something, and they're going to come back and reorder that from you every month, then you absolutely need to think about what the long-term value of closing a sale is. And in some of those cases, you'll even take a loss on the initial sale if it means you get a recurring client that's coming back regularly over and over and over again. So think about what the long-term value of the client is, and set for yourself a reasonable timeline for how much money you would make over a 1-year period or a 5-year period, whatever is relevant to your business. Think about it in that context. And again, don't be afraid to just do the math, add these things up, put a number on it, right? Finally, we're going to talk about AdWords, and I think AdWords is the other piece of this that gets you a concrete anchor for measuring return on investment. It's important to understand how prices are set on AdWords. They're set by people, your direct competition, and the prices are set at auction, which means the price is exactly what other people were willing to pay for it and not a penny more, which means it's probably a really accurate valuation of what your traffic is worth. So the simplest possible ROI metric that I can think of, I talk about this as beating the spread, right, is you're trying to evaluate the success or failure of, say, your SEO campaign. How much more organic traffic did we get? How much did our SEO campaign cost? What do we expect the long-term value of that SEO to be? Well, take that total number of traffic and multiply it, again, after you adjust for whether it's qualified or not, take the bounces out, whatever, but if you're doing it, make sure you take the bounces out for your AdWords too, and multiply that by your average cost per click, because that's what a piece of qualified traffic is worth to you, right? If you can do that, and the number adds up, the value of that traffic adds up to more than it would have cost you to just throw more money at AdWords and buy that traffic online, congratulations, you beat the spread. Right there, you know you beat AdWords, and AdWords is the baseline. You can always throw more money at AdWords and get more traffic if you want to. And if the math adds up on doing that for you, and please do the math, know what it costs on AdWords to get all the way down to a closed sale. You should know if AdWords is worth it for you, or if people in your industry are either overvaluing the traffic, or if there's something you're doing wrong such that it adds up for everybody else in your industry but not for you. Something to think about. But again, if we're using that as our baseline, look at, does your total traffic value that you got from non-paid sources add up to more in value than it cost you to get that traffic? If you spent a ton of money on an SEO campaign and it only got you so many clicks, and those clicks were only worth so much in AdWords, and it doesn't add up to something that gives you long-term value, that's a problem. And you want to make sure you're taking a long-term approach with this. I mean, it can take a minimum of 6 months and as much as a year or more to really understand what the actual trajectory of something like an SEO campaign is. That's a long-term prospect that you're going after there, but make sure you can do the math and that it adds up that way. So that's one way that I value the traffic itself, a return on investment measure. Another one is look at bounce rate. If a redesign of your site brings your bounce rate down, it means you've got in some cases a bounce is not always unqualified traffic. A bounce can be someone who is qualified and they take one look at your site and say, screw this, I'm out of here, right? If that's the case, every time you get one of those bounces, you're losing qualified traffic, which again goes back to the value of your traffic set at auction on AdWords. If you get 1,000 visitors a month and you have a 60% bounce rate, and you can bring that bounce rate down to 40%, now you've got 20% more traffic on your site, and you multiply that by the value of that traffic in AdWords, how soon does that redesign of your site pay for itself? Or whatever measure it is that you're doing, the A/B testing that you're doing, the conversion optimization you're doing, the user research to understand what's making people bounce on your site. If your traffic is worth real money, in what you pay for clicks, you should take that seriously when you're thinking about things as simple as just what's the bounce rate on my site. The third thing I want to touch on then is just when we take all of this and add it all up to get a hard number about all of the spend versus all of the improvements versus the actual cost of doing business and the value of your traffic, you should be able to put a bottom line on what your efforts are doing in terms of actual business generated. Again, this measure does not have to be the end of the world. Like you can pull the numbers and you can look at them and you can say, something seems a little bit off about this, and trust your intuitions and really dig into it and focus on it and say, why does this seem off to me, and ask those questions, and you may discover something about your business that answers that question and you update your formula. But have a formula, use it to keep yourself honest, because it's really easy to lose sight of these things in just the day-to-day grind of running your business, and something like this can really help to recenter you and refocus your efforts and understand what's working and what's not. So that's our topic for today. Thanks for sticking with me on this, and if you've got more specific questions, feel free to shoot us an email and I'll be happy to talk specifics about calculating ROI. It's a topic that I love. I geek out about metrics in general. So anyway, thanks again. See you next time.